name is Ray. Welcome to Stufish. We're very honoured to be part of the Global Design Forum as part of the London Design Festival. Today, myself and my design partners, Alicia, Maciej and Rick, will be talking to you about adaptive design for a new audience. It's been many months since we've been together in the studio, and we're very excited to be here and share with you some of our thoughts, ideas and designs that we have done. We're architects and production designers at Stufish Entertainment Architects. We design entertainment architecture which can be anything from a rock show for Madonna through to full-blown theatre building. Our studio has been around for over 25 years, having started with the late and great Mark Fisher. Between our design studio in London and production studio in Hong Kong, we have 20 staff that are a combination of architects, engineers, producers and designers. This combination of people have different skill sets to allow us to come together and think out of the box about the various projects we have worked on and the kind of work that we can apply ourselves for the future. Within the studio, our process works in many different ways, sometimes starting with a sketch or a collage, moving into detailed CAD and 3D modeling, using physical models as an exploratory tool or 3D printed models for presentation models. 2D and 3D animations and VR explorations allow us to digitally demonstrate the design and space that helps an artist or client understand the proposal.
Before we get into the main part of the talk, I wanted to take you on a brief journey through 30 years of rock and roll touring. Our practice has fused entertainment and architecture together in new ways to create entertainment architecture, using new technologies, changes in logistics, and brave new venues that have been built in the world. We've continually evolved as a company and expanded our skills to bring in new technologies and new ideas and ways to make shows better, larger, more efficient, and more sustainable. And this has continued to evolve over the years. Through COVID and what's happening in the world right now, we've learned more things and we're starting to think about how in the future shows and spaces will evolve, and you'll see more of that later in the talk. So the journey starts back with the Beatles at Shea Stadium. This was a time when there was no stage design as such, and the band just played in the middle of a field with a very loud sound system in the middle of the day. This was a great experience for the crowd because they got to see the Beatles, but not so great in the sense that they couldn't really hear them that well, and they were very, very small and very, very far away because in those days there was no big video screens. Move on a few years and Mark Fisher started to work with Pink Floyd, and the idea was that the stage design would actually be an architectural piece. By the use of using inflatables and different tensile roofs, we started to make interesting stages that would create an atmosphere and an environment for the band to perform in. Following that, Pink Floyd did The Wall in 1980. This was a game-changing show that involved a construction of a scenic wall throughout the whole length of the arena during the show. This brick by brick was built in between the band and the audience, and it completely changed the dynamic of a show, but also brought in this idea that a rock show could have a narrative journey, a story. It could have props, it could have scenery, it could have lifts, it could have moments with beautiful large inflatables.
The Rolling Stones' Steel Wheels tour set a new benchmark for entertainment architecture. Never before had a set of this scale been toured from stadium to stadium. Infused with architectural elements, the set design set a new trend in touring structures. U2's Pop Tour was a giant leap in technology. Working closely with Willie Williams, the band set out to tour with the world's largest video screen. Over 700 square meters of screen, never seen before in the entertainment world, leaped from city to city and set a new trend and a new benchmark for others to follow.
We then moved into doing permanent shows in Las Vegas. The first one was the Cirque du Soleil show Car at the MGM Grand. Here we not only designed the set, but also designed the theatre and the foyer space. So we could really holistically design the venue from the show and right through the space so that the audience, as soon as they entered, felt that they were part of the world. Where the stage would normally be, there was a massive hole, and there was this great stage machine created that would lift the stage up and down, rotate it, turn it around, and allow the actors to climb and fall and fly, and spectacular effects all the way through the show that really showed some death-defying stunts. It really became one of the key seminal moments of theatre and circus in the world. Following that, in 2009, U2 embarked on their 360 tour. The idea here was to sell every seat in the stadium and really allow everybody to feel immersed and close to the action. This large structure that you see behind me was created in a way to support all the sound and the lighting. It was covered in this tensile skin, and it was so large that it spanned the full width of the stadium. The stage in the centre was where the band lived, but there was also a catwalk around the edge so that the band could bridge over a part of the audience and end up in this outer ring. This stage toured around the world and was completely monumental in the changing of the way that we think about structures and touring structures in rock and roll. Although the structure was really technically complicated and did many, many things, the key thing that it had to do was connect the audience and the band to the experience.
The 2008 Beijing Olympics was another milestone for us. It was immensely exciting to be working with people like Zhang Yimou and Chen Weiyang and be part of a creative team to create one of the most amazing opening ceremonies and closing ceremonies the world had ever seen. Watched by billions of people, the sphere that emerged out of a small pit and creating a 20-meter globe for which performers could interact with imagery was fantastic.
The final moment I'm going to talk about is the 2013 Take the Crown tour by Robbie Williams. We created a large sculpture of Robbie's head at 12 meters high that was golden and sat within a wall. For most of the show, it remained gold and turned off, but at a given part of the show, it lit up and we realized it was a video screen. This was the first 3D video screen created, and especially the first 3D video screen that was tourable. It came apart into large chunks and had to go together in a very specific way. But what this did was it started to really change the dynamic of what a video screen could be and what scenery could be, and how the two things could play together. With all of these different projects that I've shown, each time we push the technology a little bit further and we explore something a little bit more interesting and a little bit more new. As we do that, we start to see that the skills we are finding along the way really propel us into an understanding of how to make these kind of shows, how to make these kind of spectacles, and the architecture that they could sit within. And that led us back to China, where we started to work on theatres.
Building on our experience and history innovating new typologies in entertainment, we focused our efforts on achieving a new milestone within entertainment architecture. Architecturally, Stufish is focused on the delivery of a holistic proposal that addressed the auditorium, the front of house, stage, context, as well as the facade to create an extended and immersive experience. Designing only the facade of a venue would detach us as designers from the core of any venue and show. Without this critical connection, a facade loses its architectural value. So the really interesting thing about the hand show theater is the process in designing it. First, we focused on the show, the requirements of the show, what kind of experiences in a broad concept we wanted to achieve. And we started to develop the auditorium. How could we achieve a milestone? What kind of standards were there that we wanted to break, and new paradigms within theater design we wanted to create and begin a discourse within this area. In the hand show theater, the way that the auditorium was designed was to surprise the audience. Architecturally, as you enter the foyer, there is what we call a reveal, where you see the structure of the lantern that has inspired the facade of the building. The auditorium was meant to surprise, and the way that we achieved this was to present people with a standard and then break it during the show. Upon entry, you were met with a very normal configuration end-on proscenium. As the show developed, the lower tier seats would swing open, revealing a giant pool. This is the first time that this has ever been done. And the upper balcony would drop to create a semi-in-the-round configuration. Nobody expected this, and it was almost as if the audience was part of the show. This was a groundbreaking project for us, because it allowed us to internally design portions of the show as well as the architecture, creating a brand new dialogue within the studio. We learned a lot from this project, which really informed the next theatre in Sichuanbana, the Daisho Theatre.
The Daisho Theatre was the next project that we took on in China, and this project was even more of a holistic project, which actually, as a studio, we were able to design from the very scratch what the show was inside the building, and then kind of move out from the inside and start to create a holistic environment for that show, and even out further to the landscape that surrounded the building. So the Daisho Theatre in Sichuanbana, which is in southern China, was a very different kind of environment to the Hanshou Theatre. It's a more natural, tropical environment, so we had a lot of kind of interesting site conditions that made us think a little bit more about how we could use the space more efficiently, because we could use a front of house area that was external. So the site was quite interesting because we had quite a lot of constraints in the height of the building. So we were in a flight path, which meant we could only go up to 18 meters high. And our show inside, which was designed by Franco Dragone, had a few kind of key requirements that he wanted to have it to be a water show. So we knew it needed to fit in a pool, and we knew that he wanted to have a kind of high dive at the end of the show, which kind of defined the height of the building in relation to the depth of the water. So suddenly we had very limiting constraints, whereas to fit a building of 1,600 seats. And it became quite clear very quickly that the building needed to provide a background for the show. So we didn't have much space to have a lot of scenery, so the building internally became the background for the show. So inside the auditorium, the audience are pretty much in a fully in the round seating arrangement, with a keyhole at one end, which is the main stage. And similar to the Hanshou, the Daisho Theatre is a fully wet and dry stage. So the stage can be fully dry, and then within seconds we can flood it and we can move all the stage lifts down to create a pool. You can see on this image here how the structure of the roof of the building becomes the background of the stage and the action. So using geometry of the structure to create a really interesting canopy, and the kind of overall creative concept was that it was like you're going underneath the tree canopy. So we use that as the setting of the building, but then also tying in the natural elements of the scenery, which entwined with the architecture. So from the inside and moving out, the roof actually also performs a backdrop for the audience as they arrive. So the external lobby, which is completely naturally ventilated, is covered by this folding geometry of roof. The journey of the audience is very choreographed. So when you arrive at the building, you start to go underneath the roof canopy, and then you go further into the building, like right under the canopy where the show happens and the magic happens inside. Spatially, we were quite restricted, so we had to be very efficient with the layout of the building. So all of the back of house areas for the show, we moved out of the main theatre building into an annex, which really allowed us to be very efficient with the auditorium.
Following on from the Daisho, we were commissioned by Chimlong in Guangzhou, an amazing company, to design another theatre, which is the Hengqin Theatre in Zhuhai, China. This theatre had demands that were wholly different than the Daisho Theatre. And because of these restrictions, we weren't able to implement the kind of efficiency of space that we achieved within the Daisho Theatre. Learning from the two, we moved that efficiency of space concept toward designing the Skolkovo Theatre in Skolkovo, Russia. Every theatre project that comes into the studio is unique in its own way. They have different restrictions, they have different requirements, they're located in different parts of the world. With Skolkovo, what we found incredibly interesting was the possibility to be innovative in how it is flexible. Adapting and evolving the concept within the Daisho Theatre of an open front of house lobby, the Skolkovo Theatre proposed an outdoor amphitheatre covered by the roof, much like the Die Show, where a pre-show event could take place, extending not only the treatment of a show, but the actual show to the front of house and to the outdoor covered area. Internally, the Skolkovo Theatre was a black box theatre that had the flexibility of changing between an occupancy of 800 people to 5,600 people, depending on the type of program that would be required internally. And it did so by a retractable ceiling, where all of the production requirements for the different types of programs within the auditorium. The Keller Auditorium was a competition that we won in Portland, Oregon.
We worked on this concept with Michael Curry Design.
And in order to further push our idea of flexibility, efficiency, and using space as sustainably as possible, we looked at the context in order to see if there's any possibility to extend that auditorium experience and the experience of going to a venue like this out into its landscape. We were lucky that here we had the likes of the Keller Fountain, designed by Lawrence Halprin, a famous American landscape architect, that was intended to be used as an outdoor stage. This gave us a focus for our architecture. We designed for the facade of the lobby space, which we introduced new program like bars and restaurants, that sat everybody along the facade, curved and bent, focused on the stage itself, to have an element of pre-show where public works, public projects could actually present shows in the intermission and in the pre-show that everybody visiting the auditorium could have the perfect aspect onto before finally going into the auditorium and seeing the main show. What was interesting about this project was that it was primarily about repurposing the front of house rather than developing the auditorium from scratch like our previous projects.
Another show where we've repurposed an existing theatre and created a whole new environment inside was a show we did in Rome with Balich Worldwide Shows, which was Giudizio Universale, which was a show about Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel. The concept was to create a vault over the auditorium and over the audience and their seats, to create an immersive environment that would be projected all around them and take the action from the stage right over the audience into the house. For that show, the existing auditorium, which was a very old building in Rome, just outside the Vatican, there wasn't the infrastructure for a show, so we effectively built a theatre within a theatre specifically for that project, which was exciting because suddenly we had a blank canvas again, but we were using this kind of old historical building as the setting for the show. Having gone through a number of our more architectural projects where we've built bespoke buildings and repurposed venues for shows, over the last few years we've really been looking at the future of entertainment architecture and how we can use that knowledge and create semi-permanent spaces which are more similar to our kind of touring shows that we've designed historically. So the idea that a theatre stays somewhere for a few years only and then moves to another place is really where we see the future of this kind of architecture going. So what we found with this project is that we can use our expertise in touring shows and really utilize those skills in the touring architecture, where we create a venue that can be fully demountable, and the way the building's designed and the structure is that it can completely be demounted and then transported to different locations. The other benefit then is that the venue itself can be flexible, so it has an inherent flexibility that can either have different shows inside it, but also the building could be reconfigured in a way that it needs to work with a different site or a different show. So we're really looking at flexible design that is both demountable and tourable.
So we wanted to show you a few projects that really redefine the boundary and blur it between the audience and the performer. And sometimes the set and the technology that surround the set become part of the performance and allow the audience to connect with it in a different way. We designed a show for Mumford & Sons, which was this new concept for them for the Delta album, which was about them really wanting to find themselves in the middle of the energy of the crowd. So this crowd would be surrounded like a sea of people around the stage. So we built this stage design that cut right across the arena, which allowed the band to be surrounded on all four sides and to have equal proximity to all members of the audience. By floating projection screens that were see-through in the sky, magnify the images of the band and deliver to all the seats in the room a sort of very intimate experience. This sort of theory of doing these kind of shows then evolved also in what we found with U2's Innocence and Experience tour, which was the first part of that tour was in 2015 with the Innocence album, Songs of Innocence, and it continued in 2018 with the Songs of Experience. These two different narrative journeys for the band and their history wanted to be told with the concept of this division between the north side and the south side of Dublin, between above and below, the subway, over the ground. And we wanted to have a journey that could take them, the band, from their home to the world. And so we divided the stage that went right down the length of the room and was dividing the arena with this double-sided video screen that we called the barricade. In the 2018 show, we had an additional floating bridge that would come out of the screen and that would be able to angle up and down and float to allow a journey for Bono or the band to sort of traverse the arena. What this really did was it impacted the way that the crowd dealt with the show. The crowd, just like with Mumford & Sons, the crowd moved around to get closer to the artist and hear different bits of the story and the narrative. So these shows, which historically were music and audience and a very big divide, we've now started to blend this together. So this continued into 2018 with Jay-Z and Beyonce's On the Run 2 tour that went around Europe and around America. And the concept of it was to tell a story on this very large cinema screen that was like a drive-in movie theatre, which was 60 metres wide, very, very large video screen. And then it would have these two catwalks that would come right out about 200 foot into the audience. And this divided the audience into chunks where there was a sort of VIP fan zone in the centre and then all the rest of the audience around. And what this allowed the performance to do was really tell a story of two narratives, people being apart and people finding a way back together. And so we had a stage at the front of the part of the stage that would lift up, and this would then track out over the audience and connect the two sides of the catwalk together. And then what would happen when the lift got here was that these staircases would come up and connect the whole piece together. And why this was interesting was that, these crowds of people that come see these shows that we've created, the ambition of what they want to see and how they want to experience an event has continually grown and evolved. And what we try to do here is to help the artist find a way of breaking that boundary and breaking what they call the fourth wall to get out there more. So at a given part in the show, the large video screen would split in the centre and it would open up to reveal a vertical orchestra of 27 band members and at times also another 20 dancers. This human energy that we built on from the Coachella performance that Beyonce did as part of the Homecoming show, which was an iconic way of using many people, from the dancers, the musicians, all together. There was 120 people on this pyramid of people that really show the power of the culture coming together and doing a very bold, artistic, but also political message. And what we do as designers is sort of provide the infrastructure for these things to happen. Combined also with the audience, this makes for a great melting pot. So On the Run 2 was an amazing show and was seen by quite a lot of people, but with all of these shows, really how they are also seen is at home. The DVDs that are made from these shows, how they are seen on the internet, based on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. It's never just seen by the people in the room. And that's a really interesting thing which has evolved over the last few years. And really, as designers, we also have to start to take that into account. And nothing has highlighted that more than the more recent developments with COVID and everybody being at home watching things on the TV. In U2's show, we started to dabble a few years ago together with Willie Williams and Treatment Studios and as Devlin with additional layers of digital technology that could be added to the performance. So in the U2 show, we developed an app where Bono's face would be able to come out of the screen as an augmented avatar and sing together with Bono at the beginning of the show. This is an amazing moment where the people became democratized because everybody had a mini Bono in their hands and everybody could decide to integrate with the show on an augmented layer as well as a real presence. Moving on from that, as the show went on, we also developed, together with Facebook Live, a magic mirror where Bono could use a mirror and film himself, and it would augment his face with a sort of Facebook filter app that we would recreate the McFisto character. This was starting to really allow the audience to understand how a live show could start to add an augmented level. So nothing did this more than when in 2019 we were developing the Madame X tour with Madonna. We worked with her on her Medellin performance for the Billboard Awards with Maluma. And although this is a set design model for what the tour ended up becoming, themes from this model also were built into the scene that we created. And so the idea for the Billboard Awards was to create this sort of street, a physical street that Madonna would feature on, and then she would go into the inside of a club with her musicians and dancers. But the whole concept behind the Madame X album was these multiple personas of Madonna. And so we wanted Madonna to be able to perform with her multiple personas and also within an additional scenic environment. And so working with many different technical companies to do volumetric capturing of Madonna, and then taking that and processing that so she could become a digital element that could evolve out of gold dust. We allowed this performance to be augmented in the camera. And so about a year ago, this was sort of relatively new technology to happen within a live show. So on the Billboard Awards, Madonna was seen with her 4 avatars dancing on the stage, along with real set, augmented set, and a whole load of real dancers. Why this started to become interesting is because we started to understand that the future of shows could have a level of augmentation. Whether it's because the people are seeing it just within the video cameras from home, or whether it's in the screens at the side so that you can see what the augmentation is, and eventually some kind of wearable technology which is bound to become a more affordable thing. People will be really augmenting these live events. And we've seen that so much happen within COVID. So within the COVID period, since everybody's been at home, people have been doing performances from their bedrooms, but also the extended reality stage has become a major thing. And you've seen it in things like the VMAs that happened in America last week, and a whole other series of events and performances by Katy Perry, where physical set is created in combination with a virtual layer. And we think that that's going to be a very interesting new layer of how we start to design shows in the future, both virtual ones, real ones, and hybrids of the two. So all of these events really celebrate culture with the crowd and the energy of the crowd. It really can't be surpassed. But as time is going on, and we've spent now 4 or 6 months without any kind of productions, we've spent time now thinking about how do we make events? How do we do new events? What has this time at home started to teach us? And how can the future event both benefit from what we've learned in this time of lockdown, but also how do we return with a big bang?
So in order to continue this innovative streak within the practice moving forward, we had to create conceptual projects that address the issues of sustainability, flexibility, adaptability, and look at how they can start to inform new types of spaces that address problems we assume, but we feel confident are going to present themselves. And that can deal with how people enter a venue, how they experience the venue before the event, and how ultimately that type of flow and structure actually inform the event itself, the show, the experience, the big reveal. And one of those precedent projects was the Beacon, which was looking at how a structural approach of stacking elements could create not only a dynamic form that ultimately creates a dynamic volume housing an atrium that houses the experience, but also begins to inform access, ingress, and egress within that venue as part of a kind of narrative discovery of that space. For this pavilion, we looked at the most simple, sustainable glulam timber, stacked with as few connections as possible, engineered to structurally maintain large cantilevers. These cantilevers would then create protected areas around this venue, because the venue was located in the Middle East conceptually. So we knew that solar gain was a massive issue. And to address that, we wanted the pure volume, not a kind of extension from it or an add-on or a facade to do the work for us, but rather the venue itself. The structure was already starting to serve a secondary need that we kind of created for the site. One of the important issues in theaters is access, ingress and egress. And typically within any venue, it's very centralized to one side. Not so much auditorium, but theaters. Access is typically done from front of house rather than the back of house. And in order to democratize that entry, while at the same time creating a unique ingress point, this twist that we've introduced to the 3 points of this lantern viewing tower allowed us to then introduce an egress, which was the reverse flow. So nature began to influence the structure behind this pavilion, the double helix. In a similar thread of exploration, looking at simplicity within the structure of a pavilion where we had a single force that created an atmospheric volume, which was tension. Without any locking mechanisms, the question was, and the challenge was, how do we create a solar shading structure that had no bolted or bonded joints, but was rather all held together by a single force, tension, to its very core. And it was done by developing a series of modular boxes that were then bound together by a single node that was forcing them together, with all the forces going to the center of this spherical space. And within this pavilion, people could move through that space while actually feeling the tension that was binding the sphere together. So now this is a kind of experiencing the elements that are creating that volume, that are creating that atmosphere, creating the varying shade as the sun goes by, but actually making it a tactile element for people to experience as they move through.
In our constant search to find new ways of doing things, we've been exploring new materials. I grew up in Indonesia, and bamboo was a ubiquitous building material, but something that is rarely seen in the entertainment world. So when we had the opportunity to design a structure for Burning Man this year, we looked at using bamboo in a new and innovative way. Working closely together with Corey Fitzgerald and Niels Ferguson, we developed an idea for a drone show. And the drone show created a structure in which the audience could lie back into it and view the show happening above them. Working closely with Atelier One, we developed a structure that had a very, very low carbon footprint, and more importantly, dealing with the very strict regulations that Burning Man have, left no trace. So at night, the structure completely disappeared. During the day, it created an interesting silhouette against the Nevada skyline.
So during COVID times, we've been developing many different projects, but also looking around and seeing what other people have been doing. Everything from drive-in shows to people doing live at home gigs where they're in their bedrooms taking videos themselves. There was the Global Citizen live at home, which was great, organised with the WHO. We've seen many extended reality shows where people have been building physical sets and doing a lot of digital editions. A great colleague of ours, Rob Sinclair, has done this amazing truck that he's been driving around England, parking up in car parks and having a small gig, which was an amazing experience just to get to a gig. Even just last night, stumbled across the King's Place Orchestra playing just outside Waitrose in the Canopy Markets in King's Cross. People are really finding ways of coming out of their shells. The beginning of this was just seeing people playing musical instruments on a balcony. And so we were really sort of inspired by all of these different people taking these undesigned routes, but very much about the experience and the audience connection. And so we've really started to think about how to take infrastructure in a city and really start to think about how that can be reinterpreted. We thought a lot about what makes a great event, why, the anticipation of getting there, why you go, who you go with, and whether you really need to be all in a big crowd in the traditional way, or whether there's a way of decentralizing the way that people get to the gig and decentralizing the way that people sit together. We started to think about the kinds of performance. Does a performance have to happen in one place on one stage? There's a performance that I've just seen opened a few days ago called Contact, which has a whole lot of actors that are in site-specific spaces in Promenade Theatre in London, and the audience wear a headset and they listen in to the actors who are talking through the headset. So there's some really interesting things happening, and we started to think about, there's so many office buildings, so many shops, so many malls, so many spaces that are now either underused or disused. How could we plug into these places? How could events be reimagined and really start to plug into it? So here's some pictures of the Brunswick Centre as a conceptual space for where people could just sit on their balconies and see a show in the middle, or the Barbican. It's sort of so theatrical in the architecture itself that very easily we could plug in a stage or a series of stages and have audience and people, whether they're people that are local or people that come to the space, really use all those different entrances in. And these projects really started to make us think about our buildings, and Maciej mentioned earlier, these structures and pavilions we've already been exploring with multiple entry points. We started to think about, well, the city itself is a performance space, and how could we have people come from all over the city, not only just because of COVID, but also as a great experience.
So once lockdown happened, we very quickly noticed that there were some pretty wonderful and miraculous things that were happening in society. One of them being that locally neighborhoods became closer. People started to connect more, to help each other out more, and this was something that should be celebrated. The other thing was that all of a sudden the NHS was at the forefront, and everybody was celebrating the NHS as really a treasure within the society in the UK. And so we started to develop the idea of knowing that somewhere in the future we're going to have a moment where all together, physically, out and about, we can celebrate these wonderful, wonderful moments that we're all living through, however difficult they might be. But a chance to also remember those that happen to pass during this time, while as well looking forward with optimism and ambition to a new kind of norm, whatever it may be. And these are the questions that we're asking ourselves now. And in order to really delve deep into this concept, we proposed a show.
So we developed a project based on the concept by Vera Lynn of We'll Meet Again. We called the project We Meet Again, which was really the idea that we would set off a series of events along the River Thames, starting up in Greenwich and moving through towards Tower Bridge. And so with these 6 different stages, we wanted to explore ways of honouring, ways of celebrating, ways of remembering the various people that have been involved in this journey. 200 video barges that would set sail from Hampton Court and have changing faces of the heroes from the lockdown period, firefighters, medical people, shopkeepers, and they would be positioned perfectly between St Thomas's Hospital and Parliament. So as well as all the audience that were around the edges and on small boats that they could bring from wherever or get on the Thames Clipper, we also developed a series of real audience barges of key workers and all of the facilities for lighting and sound that would be needed to support the action on the stage would be controlled and contained within these barges. And these barges would sail with the river as the performance happened. So you would reconfigure different formations depending on the scene we were playing out. So this is the first combination where you see 7 of the barges come together to form the rainbow, which is a celebration of community. And so at a given point, the musical performance that was on the bridge would have a culmination, and the light beams would turn to the colours of the rainbow and create the biggest rainbow to celebrate the community. And that was in We Honour. The third picture is We Remember, where we take a series of bioluminescent candles and, well, a fabulous choir made up of local choirs stands on this epic pyramidal shape in the middle of the river. They sing a hymn to the people that have been lost, and we put the glowing candles in the water. Moving forward from that, we go downstream a bit more towards South Bank, where we would find the London Philharmonic Orchestra on a barge, and then these large puppets would be puppeteered by people and would create these big fantastical moments of the ballerina or the Shakespearean actor or the guitar player or the dancer. So many different poses to create these sort of colourful, spectacular moments. As we move even further towards Tower Bridge, we go underneath Millennium Bridge, and a sort of moment, so many people, even still, have been socially distancing and keeping apart from each other. So this was that moment of embrace where people are coming back together and able to touch. And finally, we get to the final stage, which is right in front of the iconic London's Tower Bridge, which would then open with a stage floating on the water in the centre and a drone show with about 2,000 drones spelling out the words "We meet again," surrounded by the audience barges, pyrotechnics, and everybody in London and on the TV watching this spectacular piece. And we celebrate London being open for business again and the audience coming back together. As we start to think about future events, both in COVID and post-COVID, but also just in the future, we really start to think about the idea of an event that isn't just in one place at one time, whether it's a large event in a large space with multiple entry points, whether it's a series of large events in smaller venues, whether it's a series of small events in large venues, and how we can start to really rethink the city as a place to deliver performance and event in a way that maybe it hasn't been. Places that are repurposed, places that are built specifically, places that can tour. So right now, the final project that we've been developing, which we're very excited about, is a tourable theatre structure that will be an outdoor theatre with multiple entry points, and it will be keeping people socially distant but in a beautiful and a new paradigm of venue way. And we hope to share this with you some point in the future.
Like a broken bone, the stresses that have been imposed on us as designers and on our industry will reveal weaknesses that once they've been addressed, they'll become stronger. And with COVID, we have noticed many weaknesses within the standard models that we utilize, but by addressing them and proposing new and innovative solutions to both the venues, the events, and the very critical aspects around them that are required in order for them to function. By identifying these inflexible and inefficient and restrictive points within our industry, we create opportunity to innovate for a more sustainable and inspiring future within the industry.
The only constant is change. Not only do we embrace it, we relish it. It gives us the opportunity to reimagine the future in a way that we couldn't have done a few months ago. As a studio, moving forward, we are creating adaptive spaces for new audiences because we have to. Nothing is ever static. Nothing ever stands still. And that is the spirit of what we do. Our work is unique as we cover so many different genres, but each job brings with it new and exciting challenges. All of the projects that we have shown today have pushed the boundaries, whether it's in the physical or virtual world. We've always designed for the next audiences, but during these challenging times, we relish the opportunity to be more creative, to be more sustainable, and bringing back the audiences again. At the end of the day, our designs are here to help tell stories. I hope that you've enjoyed our stories. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.